Elderly man has his loyal companion taken away by authorities, but what happens in court moves everyone to tears. Old Walter's eyes welled up when he saw two uniformed men entering through the gate of his home in Oak Ridge, a small town in rural Vermont. Something in his heart already knew what was coming. Charlie, his inseparable emerald green feathered parrot, also seemed to sense the danger, perching tensely on his owner's shoulder. "Good morning, sir. We're from Wildlife Protection. We have a report that you're keeping a wild animal without proper documentation," said the taller of the officers, displaying an official badge. Walter, at 87, with white hair and hands calloused, by time felt his world crumbling. Charlie had been with him since he was 17 years old. He was more than an animal. He was a living part of his history, a link to his deceased father who had given him the young bird when he was still a young man full of dreams. "But sir, this parrot has been with me for 70 years. My father gave him to me before all these laws existed. How can I have documentation for something so old?" Walter's voice trembled while Charlie, restless, repeated, "Calm down, Walter, calm down," a phrase he had heard so many times over the decades. The younger officer, Parker, hesitated for a moment, but the older one, Thompson, remained firm. "I'm sorry, sir, but the law is clear. Wild animals need documentation no matter how long they've been with their owners." On that sunny Saturday morning, as curious neighbors watched the scene through their windows, Walter helplessly watched as they placed Charlie in a transport cage. The parrot, who had never known the confines of a cage, struggled desperately, while shouting, "Walter, where are you?" a phrase that pierced the old man's heart like a sharp blade. When the Wildlife Protection vehicle disappeared around the bend on Maple Street, taking with it 70 years of companionship, Walter collapsed on the porch bench. The house, once animated by constant whistling and witty phrases from Charlie, plunged into a sepulchral silence. The next morning, Sunday, Walter didn't open the windows as usual. He didn't turn on the old radio to listen to the country music program that he and Charlie enjoyed. He didn't prepare coffee for two, as he always did, serving some to the parrot in a separate cup. For the first time in 7 decades, he was truly alone. Martha, the loyal housekeeper who had worked for him for 15 years, arrived on Monday and found her boss still in his pajamas, sitting in the armchair where Charlie used to perch. "Mr. Walter, you can't stay like this," she said, concerned about the elderly man's paleness. "Let's have some coffee and think about what we can do to bring Charlie back." "There's nothing to do, Martha. They took him away. They said it was against the law to have a parrot without documents. How am I going to explain that to Charlie? He must think I abandoned him." The old man's voice broke into a restrained, "Sobitese, Martha." A woman of practical gestures and a huge heart didn't accept defeat. "You have children, don't you? It's time for them to help. I'm going to call them right now." Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now continuing. Robert and Mary, Walter's 2 children, had been living in New York for years. Contact with their father was limited to sporadic calls on holidays and hurried annual visits. When Martha explained the situation over the phone, the reaction was less than enthusiastic. "Martha, my father has always been stubborn about that parrot. How many times did we tell him he needed to regularize the situation? Now I can't just drop everything here and go fix this," said Robert, a multinational executive hurriedly consulting his wristwatch. Mary, a university professor, was equally evasive. "Look, I'm in the middle of a crucial research project. I can't just abandon my students. Besides, Dad always paid more attention to that bird than to us." When Martha reported the conversation, Walter showed no surprise. Years of estrangement had already prepared his heart for his children's indifference. But that rejection, right at the moment when he needed support most, wounded him deeply. "No problem, Martha. I'll solve this on my own. We've always solved everything together, Charlie and I." At the Wildlife Enforcement Office, the reception was cold and bureaucratic. A young woman with square glasses and an impassive expression informed him that the parrot had been sent to the Wildlife Rehabilitation Center, WRC, in Burlington. "But I need to see him. He's never been alone. He must be frightened," the old man pleaded. "Sir, visits are not allowed. The animal is in an evaluation process for subsequent placement. If you want to reclaim it, you'll need to submit a formal request proving the legal origin of the animal or requesting a custody permit. Custody permit? We're talking about Charlie, who I've raised since I was a young man. How can I need authorization to keep someone who's already family? Momentary indignation gave strength to Walter's weak voice. On the way back home, the elderly man observed through the bus window the town he knew so well, but which now seemed strange, hostile. Oak Ridge, with its cobblestone streets and historic mansions, was the place where he had lived his entire life, where he had married Elizabeth, who had passed away 15 years ago, where he had raised his children, and where over decades he had built with Charlie a relationship of complicity that defied many people's understanding. Passing the central square, he saw Mrs. Jenkins, the neighbor who had always looked disapprovingly at the freedom Walter gave the parrot. She quickly averted her gaze when their eyes met, quickening her pace as if fleeing from a silent accusation. It was at that moment that a suspicion began to form in Walter's mind. Mrs. Jenkins' frequent complaints about Charlie, especially after. The parrot started imitating the shrill ringtone of her phone, the veiled threats that one day that bird is going to have to follow the rules like everyone else. The coincidence was too strong. It was her. She was the one who reported Charlie, he exclaimed too loudly, making other passengers look at him curiously. At home, sitting at the kitchen table with Martha, Walter shared his discovery. I need to prove that Charlie isn't just any animal. He's part of my history, older than many people in this town. Martha, leafing through the local newspaper, pointed to a small advertisement. Look here, Mr. Walter. Jessica Morgan, attorney specializing in environmental law. Maybe she can help? The law office was on the second floor of an old building in downtown Oak Ridge. With no elevator, the 17 steps were a challenge for Walter's tired legs, but determination drove him forward. Each step was one step closer to Charlie. Jessica Morgan, a young woman of no more than 30, received Walter with politeness but initial skepticism. Her office was modest, with shelves of law books and a window that opened onto the town square. Mr. Walter, to be honest, cases involving wild animals are complicated. Environmental legislation is rigorous, and without documentation proving the legal origin of the parrot, the chances are slim. Miss, I don't have documents, but I have photos. I have letters my father wrote mentioning Charlie. I have the testimony of people who have known me for decades and know that Charlie has always been with me. The lawyer hesitated. Cases like this rarely brought recognition or significant financial return, but there was something in the determination of this gentleman, in the way he spoke of the parrot as if it were a family member, that touched her heart. I have a grandfather who loves birds, she said, looking at a photo on her desk. I can't imagine how he would feel if they took his canaries away from him. So you'll help me? I'll try, Mr. Walter. I can't promise results, but I'll do my best. The following days were filled with intense activity. Jessica gathered testimonies from longtime neighbors, found yellowed photographs showing a young Walter with Charlie, and even obtained a statement from the local veterinarian who had been monitoring the parrot's health for more than 20 years. Meanwhile, Walter lived between hope and despair. At night, alone in his silent house, he talked to the empty perch as if Charlie were still there. We'll make it, friend. We're going to bring you back home. A preliminary hearing was scheduled with Judge Mitchell Harris, known for his rigid interpretation of the law. The result was discouraging. This court understands the emotional attachment, but cannot make exceptions to environmental legislation. The Amazon parrot is an endangered species, and possession without proper documentation constitutes an environmental crime, the magistrate ruled, denying the request for the immediate return of the animal. Leaving the courtroom, Walter seemed to have aged another 10 years in a matter of minutes, his body bent even more as if carrying an invisible weight. Don't give up, Mr. Walter. We'll appeal, and in the meantime, I'll try to get permission for you to visit Charlie at the WRC, promised Jessica, determined not to be discouraged by the first defeat. At the Wildlife Rehabilitation Center, bureaucracy proved even more relentless. The director, Dr. Susan Coleman, a woman with a severe expression and an impeccably white lab coat, refused to bend the rules. I understand your situation, but the Regulations exist for a reason. We cannot create precedents, she said, as she escorted Walter and Jessica out of her office. Before they left completely, however, a younger staff member, Amber, approached discreetly. "The parrot you mentioned, he's not eating properly. He keeps repeating, 'Walter, where are you?' all day. I've never seen anything like it." That information was like a knife to the old man's chest. Imagining Charlie suffering, refusing to eat, calling for him, was a torture worse than any physical pain. "Please, let me see him. Just 5 minutes. He needs to know I haven't abandoned him," Walter pleaded, with tears flowing freely down his wrinkled face. Amber looked nervously from side to side. "I can't, I'd lose my job, but..." She hesitated, then took a small recorder from her pocket. "You can record a message. I promise to place it near his cage every day." That night, at home, as he contemplated the starry sky through the living room window, the same sky Charlie used to observe with curiosity, Walter made a decision. He wouldn't just passively wait for the legal proceedings, he needed to do something more. The next morning, he sought out Martha. "I need to find out if it really was Mrs. Jenkins who made the complaint. Could that help the case?" "I think so," Martha replied thoughtfully. "If we prove the complaint was made for personal reasons and not out of genuine concern for the animal's welfare, it might help." Investigating wasn't an easy task for an 87-year-old man, but Walter had something many young people didn't possess: the respect and trust of the community built over decades. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now continuing. With the help of Joe, the bakery owner, Walter discovered that Mrs. Jenkins had filed the complaint after an argument at the supermarket, where she had demanded that he keep Charlie in a cage. She said it was absurd that a parrot had more freedom than many people in this town, Joe reported, while wrapping bread in a paper bag. She said she was going to do something about it. Jessica received the information with interest. "This could be useful, Mr. Walter. It shows there was bad faith in the complaint." While the case followed its legal course, Walter's life had transformed into a shadow of what it once was. His mornings, once animated by Charlie's witty comments, were now filled only by the ticking of the old clock on the wall. The afternoons, which used to pass quickly with the conversations between the two, now dragged on endlessly. The nights were the worst. The silence amplified the absence. At the WRC, Charlie was also deteriorating. Even with the recordings of Walter's voice, the parrot ate less and less, lost feathers, and his once lively behavior gave way to a concerning apathy. Amber, the staff member who secretly helped, documented all this in daily reports on the animal's health. These reports she knew could be crucial for the case. Jessica worked tirelessly on the legal strategy. After the first judge's refusal, she sought another path, requesting a reassessment based on veterinary reports that would attest to the emotional bond between Walter and Charlie and the mutual harm caused by the separation. "Mr. Walter, I've secured an expert in animal behavior who will evaluate Charlie tomorrow," she announced during a visit to the elderly man, "and will also use testimony from a gerontologist about the psychological impact of the separation on people your age." So a small spark of hope was forming, small but significant. News of Walter's fight to recover his parrot began to spread throughout the town. At first, it was just conversations in the square, comments at the market, discussions at the bakery. Then the local newspaper published an article, "Elderly Man Fights in Court for His Companion of 7 Decades, a Parrot." The headline caught the attention of Sarah Andrews, a reporter from a major newspaper in Burlington. Intrigued, she came to Oak Ridge to interview Walter. The elderly man, receiving the journalist in his simple living room, told his story without embellishment. He spoke of the day his father came home with a baby parrot, a gift for his 17th birthday. He related how Charlie had witnessed his marriage to Elizabeth, the birth of his children, their departure for the big city, his wife's death. How the parrot repeated phrases from people who no longer existed, keeping alive memories that might otherwise have been lost. "Charlie isn't just a pet. He's the last living witness to my history," he said, his voice breaking. Sarah captured the essence of that unique relationship, and wrote a moving report. The text went viral on social media, and soon Walter's cause was gaining supporters across the country. Letters of solidarity began to arrive, phone calls, even offers of financial help to fund the legal process. The small house on Maple Street became a pilgrimage point for curious onlookers and sympathizers. The public pressure had its effect. A new judge, Judge David Lawrence, took over the case after Judge Harris's temporary removal due to health reasons. Known for more humanized approaches, Judge Lawrence scheduled a new hearing. On the eve of this crucial day, Walter couldn't sleep. He stayed on the porch until late, looking at the stars as he used to do with Charlie. "Tomorrow, friend, tomorrow we'll fight with everything we've got," he whispered to the sky. The courtroom was packed the next morning. Besides Jessica and Walter, there were journalists, curious onlookers, and even Amber, who had requested a day off from work specifically to be present. To everyone's surprise, Mrs. Jenkins also attended, sitting discreetly at the back of the room. Her eyes avoided direct contact with Walter's. Judge Lawrence, a middle-aged man with kind eyes behind his glasses, opened the session with an unusual observation. "This court recognizes that we are dealing not only with the cold application of the law, but with lives, human and animal, deeply intertwined." Jessica presented her arguments with passion and technical precision. She explained how the separation was negatively affecting both Walter and Charlie. She presented old photographs, testimonies from neighbors, the report from the expert who had evaluated Charlie at the WRC, confirming his extraordinary bond with the elderly man. When it was Walter's turn to speak, he took a yellowed envelope from his pocket. "Your Honor, this is a letter my father wrote to me in 1953 when I left Oak Ridge for the first time to work in Burlington. In it, he asks me to take good care of Charlie, to remind him of the words he himself taught the Parrot." With trembling hands, Walter read excerpts from the letter, his voice heavy with emotion. The entire room listened in respectful silence. When he finished, there wasn't a dry eye in the venue. Even the wildlife protection representative, who advocated for the strict application of the law, seemed moved. It was at this moment that something unexpected happened. Mrs. Jenkins stood up from her place. "Your Honor, I request permission to speak," she said with a trembling voice. Judge Lawrence, surprised, granted it. "I was the one who reported Mr. Walter's Parrot," she confessed, to everyone's astonishment. "I did it after a silly argument about the noise Charlie made imitating my cell phone. I was angry, frustrated, but I never imagined it would cause so much suffering." Tears streamed down Mrs. Jenkins' wrinkled face as she continued. "Seeing Mr. Walter like this, withering away without his companion, made me realize the terrible mistake I made. I publicly apologize and implore the court to return Charlie to someone who really cares for him." The unexpected confession caused a commotion. Judge Lawrence, visibly touched, announced a brief recess to consider all aspects of the case. During the 30 longest minutes of Walter's life, he remained seated, staring fixedly at his interlaced hands. Jessica, beside him, tried to convey confidence, but she was also apprehensive. When everyone returned to their places, Judge Lawrence made a surprising announcement. "Before delivering my decision, I would like to meet the Parrot in question." Murmurs filled the room. The judge explained, "In exceptional cases like this, I believe all parties involved deserve to be considered, including the animal." An hour later, a WRC staff member entered the room carrying a covered cage. When the cloth was removed, revealing Charlie, a collective gasp filled the environment. The Parrot, once vibrant in his emerald green, was visibly debilitated. His feathers had lost their shine, and he was huddled in a corner of the cage, head down. "Charlie," Walter called softly. It was as if an electric current ran through the Parrot's body. He raised his head, looked directly at the elderly man, and to everyone's amazement began to speak. "Walter, where are you?" "Walter, it's coffee time. Elizabeth said, don't forget your medicine." Words and phrases accumulated over 70 years of coexistence poured from Charlie's beak, creating a sonic portrait of the shared life between the two. Judge Lawrence watched attentively, clearly impacted. When Charlie finally calmed down, the judge revealed something personal. I also grew up with a parrot. His name was Pete. He taught me a lot about loyalty and affection when I was a boy. After a few more moments of reflection, the magistrate announced his decision. Considering all the evidence presented, the technical reports that attest to the emotional bond between Mr. Walter and the parrot Charlie, as well as the negative impacts of separation for both, this court decides for the immediate and definitive return of the animal to its owner. The room erupted in spontaneous applause. Walter, hardly believing what he was hearing, let the tears flow freely. Judge Lawrence continued, "Furthermore, recognizing the exceptional circumstances of this case, I grant a special custody permit that definitively regularizes the animal's situation, considering its long history with the owner prior to current legislation." Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now continuing. Jessica hugged Walter, sharing the emotion of the victory. Around them, people congratulated each other, some discreetly wiping away tears. Mrs. Jenkins approached the elderly man timidly. "Mr. Walter, I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but—" He interrupted her with gentleness. "Jenny, we all make mistakes. The important thing is to recognize them and try to correct them, as you did today." That same afternoon, Charlie returned to the house on Maple Street. When Walter opened the cage door, the parrot flew directly to his shoulder, as he had done thousands of times over the decades. Then he toured each room of the house, as if checking that everything was in order, finally landing on the living room perch. "Welcome back, friend," said Walter, gently caressing the parrot's maltreated feathers. "We're home now." The following days were of recovery for both. Walter went back to preparing breakfast for two, to chatting animatedly while watering the plants in the yard, to sharing stories during afternoons on the porch. Charlie, in turn, progressively regained his appetite, the vibrancy of his feathers, the energy of his flights around the house. The news of the reunion between the elderly man and his parrot had a positive impact. The local newspaper published a photo of the two on the porch, with the headline, "Justice that comes on wings, Walter and Charlie finally together." The image went viral, becoming a symbol of a battle won by affection. The case also generated changes at the WRC. Amber, the staff member who had secretly helped, was promoted and went on to coordinate a new program for evaluating emotional bonds between elderly owners and wild animals kept for many years as pets. Officer Parker, the youngest wildlife protection officer who had participated in the seizure, requested a transfer to another department. "I want to work with environmental education," he explained to his superior. "Prevent situations like this instead of just applying the law mechanically." Jessica gained professional recognition from the case, but more important to her was the friendship she developed with Walter and Charlie. She became a frequent visitor to the house on Maple Street, often bringing her grandfather along. Robert and Mary, the distant children, learned about the whole story through the media. Embarrassed for not having supported their father at such a crucial moment, they tried to make contact. Walter, without resentment, received the calls with the same gentleness as always, but something had fundamentally changed in their relationship. "Sometimes, son," he said to Robert during a late visit, "we need to lose something precious to understand the value of caring for what matters." On a quiet afternoon, as they had tea on the porch, Jessica asked a question that had long intrigued her. "Mr. Walter, what will happen to Charlie when you're no longer here?" The elderly man smiled, watching the parrot picking up a sunflower seed. "I've thought about that, Jessica. Charlie will probably outlive me. Parrots can live to be 100 years old." He paused before continuing. "That's why I made a will. The house will go to a foundation that will care for Charlie for the rest of his life, keeping him here, where he has always lived. And you, if you accept, will be his legal guardian." Jessica, moved, accepted the responsibility. "It would be an honor, Mr. Walter." The following months brought renewed peace to the house on Maple Street. Walter and Charlie resumed their routine, now enriched by frequent visits from new friends. The perch in the living room got a special plaque, a gift from Jessica. Home of Charlie, witness to an extraordinary life. Mrs. Jenkins, in her process of redemption, planted fruit trees in her yard. For when Charlie wants to visit, she explained timidly. Winter came, bringing with it the cold mornings typical of the Vermont mountains. On one of these mornings, as fog still covered the streets of Oak Ridge, Walter woke up especially early. He sat on the porch with a steaming cup of coffee, watching the sunrise. Charlie, as always, accompanied him, perched on the back of the chair. "You know, Charlie," said the elderly man, contemplative, "life has played many tricks on us, but it has also given us incredible gifts. And you, my friend, were the greatest of them." The parrot, as if comprehending the depth of that moment, repeated a phrase he had learned decades ago in the voice of Walter's father. "What matters is not time, but what we do with it." Walter smiled, recognizing in the parrot's words the wisdom his own father had tried to convey. It was as if, through Charlie, generations conversed, transcending time and absence. That morning, as the sun finally overcame the fog, bathing Oak Ridge in golden light, Walter felt a profound peace. The battle to keep Charlie by his side had been won. But more important than that was the certainty that both had made a mark on the world, a story of loyalty and affection that, like the words preserved in the parrot's prodigious memory, would continue to echo far beyond the time that had been granted to them. And in the house on Maple Street, as it had always been and would continue to be, man and bird shared breakfast, witnesses to a friendship that the law failed to understand, but that justice, in its highest form, finally recognized. Judge Lawrence, who had decided the case, occasionally passed by Maple Street just to see the two on the porch. He never entered, respecting judicial protocol, but waved discreetly, receiving in return a wave from Walter and a cheerful whistle from Charlie. On one of these passes, Judge Harris, the first judge who had denied the initial request, accompanied him. Observing the scene from a distance, he commented, "Perhaps I was too rigid." Judge Lawrence simply replied, "The law exists to serve justice, not the other way around." Martha, the loyal housekeeper, continued to care for the house and prepare the treats that Charlie so enjoyed. "I've never seen a friendship like this," she commented once as she observed man and parrot conversing on the porch. "It's as if they understand each other without needing words." Life continued its course in Oak Ridge. Seasons changed, people came and went. But in the house on Maple Street, time seemed to have its own rhythm, marked by a companionship that defied conventional explanations. 6 months after the judicial decision, the WRC officially implemented a new protocol for evaluating cases similar to Walter and Charlie's, considering animal welfare and emotional bonds, especially with elderly owners. It was a small but significant advancement in environmental legislation, an acknowledgement that there are situations where the heart should weigh as much as the cold letter of the law. Jessica, driven by the experience, specialized even more in cases involving animal rights and the elderly. Her small office became a reference, and she frequently cited Walter and Charlie's case in lectures and legal articles. On a particularly significant afternoon, about a year after the reunion, Robert and Mary came to visit their father. They brought gifts and words of reconciliation, finally understanding the value of the bonds they had neglected for so long. Walter received them with genuine affection. Charlie, initially wary of the visitors he hadn't seen in years, eventually remembered them to everyone's surprise. "Robert! Blue shirt!" exclaimed the parrot suddenly, repeating a phrase their mother used to say when preparing her son for school decades ago. The son, a successful executive accustomed to maintaining composure in any situation, couldn't contain his tears. It was like hearing his mother's voice through the parrot, an echo of the past preserved in Charlie's colorful wings. "Dad," said Robert emotionally, "I think I understand now why you fought so hard for him. He's not just a pet, he's part of our family history." Walter nodded, satisfied to finally be understood. Mary, the professor daughter, fascinated by the parrot's extensive vocabulary and his ability to contextualize phrases learned over decades, proposed a research project. "I want to document Charlie's memory, Dad. It's a unique phenomenon that deserves to be studied. With Walter's permission, she began to record the parrot's vocalizations, cataloging phrases and identifying their origins, some dating back to people who had long since passed away. The project gained academic interest, attracting researchers who marveled at Charlie's ability to preserve voices and expressions from different eras. It was like having access to a living sound archive of the history of a family and, by extension, of a small Vermont town. One day, while Mary was working on the recordings on the porch, Charlie surprised everyone by repeating an old lullaby that Elizabeth, Mary's mother and Walter's deceased wife, used to sing to her children. The melody, preserved in the parrot's prodigious memory, brought tears to everyone's eyes. "It's amazing," commented Mary, moved. "Through him, Mom is still a little present." Walter smiled, thoughtful. "I've always said Charlie is more than a parrot. He's the guardian of our memories." In Oak Ridge's central square, where Walter now returned to stroll daily with Charlie on his shoulder, children would gather, fascinated by the parrot who seemed to tell stories from other times. The elderly recognized in the phrases Charlie repeated echoes of people and eras that only they still remembered. "He's like a living library," commented Joe from the bakery. "He keeps words that the rest of the world has already forgotten." Charlie's fame surpassed the borders of Oak Ridge. A nationally circulated magazine published a report about the parrot who overcame bureaucracy for the right to remain with his human companion. The case became an example in discussions about environmental ethics and animal rights. In another demonstration of how their story had impacted the community, the local public school organized an essay contest with the theme "Walter and Charlie, a friendship that overcame time." The children wrote moving stories, some fanciful, others surprisingly insightful about the value of loyalty and companionship. The award ceremony took place in the square, with Walter and Charlie as guests of honor. The elderly man, visibly moved, listened to the winning essays being read aloud and thanked with simple words. "Charlie and I just did what any friend would do. We stayed together when they tried to separate us." The seasons continued their cycle. Spring covered Oak Ridge with flowers. Summer brought hot afternoons ideal for naps in the yard hammock. Autumn painted the trees with golden tones, and winter returned to bring the foggy mornings that Walter so appreciated. On one of these winter mornings, exactly 2 years after the legal battle, Walter woke up earlier than usual. He dressed carefully, prepared an especially strong coffee, and sat on the porch with Charlie as he had always done. "Today is a special day, friend," he said to the parrot. "It's been 2 years since we got back together after that separation." Charlie, always attentive to changes in his companion's tone of voice, repeated one of Walter's favorite phrases, "What the law separates, the heart unites." The elderly man smiled, recognizing his own words returned by his feathered friend. It was one of the many phrases they had exchanged over 70 years of coexistence, now part of a dialogue that transcended the limitations of communication between species. Jessica arrived later, bringing a small cake to celebrate the date. She found Walter and Charlie on the porch, observing the town that was slowly awakening. 2 years, Mr. Walter," she said, smiling. "Who would have thought that day at the Wildlife Enforcement Office would bring us here?" Walter nodded, thoughtful. "You know, Jessica, before all this happened, I thought I had lived all the adventures life could offer me. I was wrong. The fight. For Charlie taught me it's never too late to defend what we love." The young lawyer, who had grown professionally and personally through that experience, sat beside the elderly man. "Your case changed a lot, you know. Now, before any animal seizure, officers have to evaluate the emotional bond, especially with elderly owners." "It's good to know our story served a greater purpose," replied Walter, gently caressing Charlie's feathers. The morning progressed peacefully, with visits from friends and acquaintances who came to celebrate the date. Martha brought special cookies. Joe appeared with fresh bread. Even Mrs. Jenkins came, still a bit shy, but genuinely happy to see the duo reunited and thriving. In the afternoon, after everyone had left, Walter and Charlie returned to the porch. The sun was beginning to set, painting Oak Ridge's sky with orange hues that reminded one of the feathers of certain exotic birds. "You know, Charlie," said the elderly man, contemplative, I always wondered why my father chose a parrot to give me as a gift on that distant day. Now I think I understand." Charlie, perched on the back of the chair, tilted his head as if he was really listening. He knew I would have a long life, but he also knew that loneliness is the price we pay for it. So he gave me a friend who could accompany me throughout the journey, who would keep my memories when I began to forget them, who would remind me of the voices that were silenced by time. The parrot, as if comprehending the depth of that moment, softly repeated, "Walter, my son." It was the voice of the elderly man's father, preserved through the decades by Charlie's prodigious memory. Walter smiled, moved. In that moment, he understood that his fight had not been merely for the right to keep a pet. It had been for the preservation of his own history, for the right to keep alive a bond that transcended the conventional understanding of friendship or companionship. Night fell slowly over Oak Ridge. In the streets, lights began to turn on. In the house on Maple Street, Walter and Charlie went inside, leaving the porch empty but full of stories told and retold over 70 years, stories of loyalty, loss, struggle, and above all, of love that defies explanation. And so, as the town fell asleep, man and bird continued their shared journey, witnesses to a time that insisted on passing, but which they, each in their own way, helped to preserve. On Walter's birthday, as he turned 89, his children organized a small surprise party. Robert and Mary, now much more present in their father's life, invited close friends and, especially, the people who had been fundamental in the battle to keep Charlie. Jessica came with her grandfather, who immediately established a connection with Walter, sharing stories about birds and about growing up in an America so different from the current one. Amber, the former WRC employee, now coordinator of the new program for evaluating emotional bonds, brought an official certificate that formally recognized Charlie as a living heritage of the town. Judge Lawrence sent a card with kind words, maintaining professional distance, but expressing joy for the evident happiness of Walter and Charlie. Martha prepared the birthday boy's favorite treats, and Joe brought a special cake from the bakery. During the party, as animated conversations filled the room, Walter observed with satisfaction the harmony that had been established in his life. Charlie, always sociable, moved among the guests, interacting especially with Jessica's grandfather, as if the two elderly men shared a secret language. In a quiet moment, Mary approached her father with news about her academic project. "Dad, I've finished Charlie's memory catalogue. I documented more than 200 distinct phrases, some over 50 years old." Walter smiled, proud. "And what did you discover, daughter?" "I discovered that Charlie isn't just an extraordinary parrot. He's a living archive of the history of our family and, in a way, of Oak Ridge itself. Some expressions he uses aren't even part of current vocabulary anymore." The elderly man nodded, thoughtful. "I always knew he was special, not just for his intelligence or memory, but for the way he connects us to the past." The party continued lively until nightfall. When the last guest said goodbye, Walter sat exhausted but happy in his favorite armchair. Charlie perched on the back, as he always did. "It was a good day, friend," said the elderly man, gently caressing the parrot's feathers. "Who would have thought we'd still have so many joys ahead?" Charlie, as if wanting to contribute to the reflective moment, repeated a phrase that Elizabeth used to say, "Life always finds a way to surprise us." Walter smiled, recognizing his deceased wife's wisdom in the words reproduced by the parrot. It was as if she were still there, participating in that moment of celebration. The days that followed brought a peaceful and rewarding routine. Mornings, on the porch, watching Oak Ridge awaken. Afternoons of reading, with Charlie attentively listening to stories Walter read aloud. Nights of silent reflection, occasionally interrupted by a phrase or a whistle from the parrot. On a particularly sunny Sunday, Jessica came to visit, bringing significant news. "Mr. Walter, remember that bill I mentioned, inspired by your case? It was approved. Now there's specific protection for wild animals that have lived for decades with their owners, especially the elderly." The elderly man, sitting in his rocking chair on the porch, smiled with satisfaction. "So our fight was worth it for others too." "Worth it for many," confirmed Jessica. We already have 3 similar cases being resolved based on this new legislation. People who can keep their companions without fear of losing them. That news brought Walter a profound sense of accomplishment. It wasn't just about him and Charlie. It was about recognizing and respecting bonds that transcended conventional understanding. Bonds built over decades of coexistence, trust, and mutual affection. As autumn approached, bringing with it cooler winds and golden leaves that gently fell over the yard, Walter noticed a subtle change in himself. There was a deeper peace, a quiet acceptance of the flow of life, a genuine contentment with each moment shared with Charlie and with the new friends life had brought him. One morning, while having his coffee on the porch, he observed 2 children, passing by the street, pointing excitedly at Charlie and waving. The parrot, always sociable, responded with a friendly whistle. "See that, Charlie? We're local celebrities now," Walter joked. The parrot, as if understanding the joke, repeated a phrase the elderly man often said, "Fame doesn't fill your belly, but it warms your heart." Walter laughed, delighted with the precision of his feathered friend's timing. It was in these small moments, in these interactions that seemed to transcend the barriers between species, that he found his greatest joy. In the afternoon, while watering the plants in the yard, with Charlie following him from branch to branch, Walter reflected on the extraordinary journey they had shared. From the mornings of his youth, when he received the baby parrot from his father's hands, to that moment, 70 years later, when both enjoyed a late and unexpected celebrity. "You." "No, Charlie," he said, speaking softly as water flowed from the watering can to the earth. "I think we are fortunate, not just for being together, but for having learned that it's worth fighting for what we love." End of story. Dear listener, what did you think of the story of Walter and Charlie? If this bond of love between a man and his parrot touched your heart, leave your like and subscribe to the channel for more moving stories like this one. Your company is what motivates us to continue.